So let's go ahead and welcome Dr. Quinn.
You won't be surprised, but I've heard the Dr. Quinn medicine one before, and I just always have to say, like, yes, Dr. Quinn, early childhood education woman. Yes, correct. So thank you so much for having me. I feel like I have to disclose at the front end that, yes, my research is in all those things. I like to think of myself as a researcher interested in 21st century teaching and learning. So I'm really interested in sort of thinking about our current context and current world and how it affects children and how we can best support children, both kind of teachers, but also caregivers as well. But I'm also here in front of you as a parent of a kindergarten child who attends a College Station ISD school. So I'm so excited to present this from both a research standpoint, but also from a lived experience standpoint. My daughter and I are constantly negotiating over screens. So you can often hear us arguing about these very topics in our home every day. So this is very relevant to my work, but also to my life. So thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so happy to be here. I'm going to share kind of 4 things, and I'm going to try to go kind of quick just because I tend to talk a lot. So the first thing is I'm just going to give a very brief overview of kind of screen time generally, just because I think it's helpful for us all to be around the same page. And then also I want to think about, especially for children on the younger end of things, because that is my area of expertise. So thinking about early childhood and elementary education aged children. Some of the opportunities and affordances that we have with screen times, but also the inherent risks that exist. And then kind of the meat of it is that I want us to think about how do we optimize screen time so that it's meaningful and positive and not just screen time for screen time's sake. And then the last thing, and I'll hopefully be brief with this one, is kind of thinking about how approaches for identifying high quality opportunities for children to engage with screens. So I could give you like a list of all the best apps and a list of all the best videos, but like these things change all the time. It's constantly moving. So instead of that, I'm going to help us hopefully think about criteria of things that we might look for rather than sort of specific things. So first of all, of course, what is screen time? It's any time a child or any person really engages with something with a screen, right? I know that's basic, but I feel like I have to say it. So it includes things like TV, tablets, computers, and smartphones. Children average, there's a lot of different research out there about kind of what is the general average of how much screen time children are getting. The kind of one that I kept seeing was 2.5 hours a day on average for children from toddler age around 2 up to age 8. So that's kind of prime early childhood years, which for some people may seem like a lot, and for some people may seem like not that much. So, that's always interesting to think about. We do see that there's slightly less for children on the younger end of things, and also there's some differences based on income and wealth. And the general consensus seems to be that screen time increases a little bit as children get older. So around 8 to 12, kind of the tail end of those elementary, intermediate years, we're looking at 4 to 6 hours on average per day, which is quite a lot, and includes all those things that are happening in school as well as at home. What we know if you interact with children is that children use screens very competently. Often it feels innate that children just are able, like Krista said, they know a lot more about technology often than we do. And so that I think is a good reminder that screens are here to stay, and screen time is somewhat inevitable to a certain extent. And so it's all about figuring out how to best optimize it. And one thing that's really important to think about, and that's kind of the last bullet point here, is that not all screen time is created equal. So when we look at research, and especially for researchers who try to evaluate the effect of screen time on different outcomes for children, you can't just say screen time in general. You can, but it's not very effective to do that because some screen time is beneficial. Some types of screen time are beneficial, some less so. So the types really matter and mediate some of the effects of screen time. So something like social screen time, especially as children get older and sort of are in their adolescence, I'm sure Tyler's going to cover that. That's one very different type of screen time, for example, than sort of the passive kind of consuming content that a lot of people, not just children, engage in. And then when you get down to kind of the active, interactive, and educational types of screen time, those are when we can kind of maximize some of the benefits of screen time rather than that sort of passive consumptive screen time. What we also know, as I mentioned, is that technology is moving at a rapid pace, and there's nothing to suggest that this kind of exponential rate is going to slow down at any time. Technology is constantly changing, it's constantly becoming obsolete. The thing I kept reading when I was preparing this slideshow was it took 2.5 million years for humans to kind of use fire effectively to cook food, and it took us 66 years to go from flight to landing on the moon. So the kind of rate at which things are changing is incredibly exponential at this point, and it's just, that pace keeps getting faster. And alongside that, children's access to technology is rapidly growing. So again, it is somewhat inevitable. 87% of children exceed the recommendations. That's birth to 12. So that's quite a lot of children exceeding those recommendations. And what we also know is that the access is increasing. So about half of 10-year-olds have their own phone. That increases as children get older. So around 14, I think it was somewhere around 90% have their own phone. Also, just worth mentioning is that this tech and tech for children is a booming marketplace. So $811 million industry, I'm just talking about the apps for children marketplace. It is a huge, huge marketplace. And so again, all of this is kind of my sort of evidence to you that these things are inevitable and they're just going to become a bigger part of our lives as time goes on. So it's sort of a like, you can't beat them, join them kind of situation. And then also, along with the you can't beat them, join them, is that there are benefits to screen time, actually. One important benefit is research, and some of this is research I've done myself, is that digital technology actually can increase engagement for children, particularly those who might be reluctant in doing something specific. So for example, I did a study a few years ago with writing, where we asked children to write with paper and pencil. And this was preschool, and they told me, many of them told me, oh, I don't know how to write. But when I gave them an iPad, suddenly, they were James Joyce, right? Like they knew exactly what to write, they knew exactly what to do. And so that sort of, just that addition, that tool, really kind of increased their engagement and their willingness to kind of participate, which I think is really powerful. The other thing that I think I want to hit on is that it also, tech can really extend what we're able to do. So going back to the idea of writing, if I give you a piece of paper and a pencil and I say, write me a story, you could draw a picture, you could write some words, but if I hand you an iPad, okay, now you can write words, you can draw pictures, you can type, you can record your voice, you can record a video, you can take pictures, you can incorporate pictures from the internet. There's so many things you can do, and so that tech piece is really extending what we're able to engage in, which is amazing. Of course, there's lots of resources we can access with tech that we wouldn't otherwise have been able to access. I'm going to show my age, but when I was a kid, right, when I was my daughter's age, I mean, we had to go to the library and get an encyclopedia to learn something, right? So very different times back then. And then also I do want to point out that for children who are neurodivergent, there is a lot of research, especially coming out now, that suggests that screen time has even more benefits for those children in particular, including things like regulation, social connection, communication, and sense of control. So that's important to say. Now, there are, of course, challenges, risks that we can associate with screen time. And this is just some of them, but I felt like it was important to mention that these exist. And like these are things that you may be already aware of just with interacting with your children or children you know. Certainly, overuse is very easy to have happen, right? It's very easy to overuse technology, and that overuse can sometimes lend itself to more sedentary behaviors. Overstimulation, I speak just from my own personal experience with my child, that screens often lend themselves to overstimulation. As we try to like wind down screen time, sometimes there tends to be a bit of a issue with self-regulation, we'll say. That's me putting it kindly. And so that's a big one, right? I'm going to leave social disengagement, but that exists, right? Especially for young children who aren't necessarily using screen times for social interaction, right? As children get older, they might use screens like we do to engage with people that aren't immediately in front of us. But for young children, they're not yet at that stage most of the time, and so really it can become quite disengaging because you are locked into the screen, and like sort of what's happening around you, you may be less aware of. We see impacts on sleep, there's physical strain, attention issues and focus issues, as well as for young children especially, some issues around content, right? Especially if you're thinking about something like YouTube, it's very easy and it happens very quickly to go from something that like, okay, I'm okay with you watching that, to like, what is that, right? That questionable, inappropriate content comes rather quickly. So, all that said, all those challenges said, I'm going to throw those behind us because we can mitigate a lot of those challenges with a few different approaches. I will say, I'm going to give us some approaches. These are not necessarily all things that I think you should do all the time. We're going to take like a salad bar approach, right? So if you like the tomatoes, take the tomatoes. If you don't like the cheese, don't take the cheese. So these are just some general suggestions for ways that we can think about how to mitigate some of those challenges. So the first thing is balance. And when I say balance, I mean balance between kind of screen and non-screen. So what we know from the literature is that children, especially young children, birth to 8, really need access to play. And they need access to different types of play. If you just play the same way over and over again, you're not going to get the benefits of play, those developmental benefits, because the idea of play is that you are accessing all these different skills and processes in a way that children, can engage in. So having that balance of different types of play, both digitally and off screen, is really important. So again, not sort of just spending all your time on one thing, screen time wise. So, mixing up different types of experiences with screens. We'll talk about some of that in a minute. But also sort of balancing screens with real life experiences as much as possible, which sometimes is easier said than done. Also, sort of with things like reading and writing, I know I said that the iPad can offer all these affordances, which is true. We still want to kind of hone in on those foundational skills of reading and writing, especially with young children as they're learning. So making sure we have a balance between kind of the tech-based, screen-based learning as well as kind of physical books and writing, just so we don't lose those skills. And then, of course, balancing in social interactions and conversations with children. We'll talk about what that looks like. Another way we can really mitigate challenges, which is what I have here in the middle, is through our engagement as children are participating in their screens. Now, I know that a lot of times when our children are engaging with a screen, it's because we need them to, right? Like, I need you to be on the screen so that I can do this thing over here. And so, kind of sitting right there like this lovely painting is not necessarily always an option for everyone. But as much as possible, it's ideal if we can accompany screen time with some level of outside engagement. And so what this may look like is watching a video together, playing a game together on the iPad, discussing, right? It's so easy to be unaware of what children are doing. And so if we just discuss like, hey, what is that? What game are you playing? Like, I'm so interested. First of all, it's exciting for them that you're interested often. And then second of all, it gives them that interaction that they need, which is going to kind of reduce some of those challenges that we talked about. Again, it's not always feasible, but it's an important tool, I think, to incorporate. And so even if it's not, I can't sit with you and have this sustained interaction, at least if I can check in with you and see what you're doing and ask questions and kind of have these touch points at moments, that can be helpful, even just to mitigate some of the questionable content issues and things like that. The third step, and this is really linked to the last one, is ideas around making screen time meaningful. I think one way that we can really maximize the benefits of screen time is by making sure that it's very meaningful. And so I kind of came up with 4 approaches to think about doing this. There are probably lots of other ways that we could do this, but one would be to really get your child thinking about what they want to use the screen for. So not just using it to use it, but rather, what are you going to do? Tell me what you're going to do, and then do it, and then you can tell me about it after. It just increases the intention of it. Asking questions throughout really helps. So, you're watching a video, okay, what's it about? It doesn't have to be like groundbreaking questions, but just asking questions to keep them engaged with you, but also to make it more intentional for them. Like, why are you watching that? Well, what made you choose that video? Encouraging engagement for them. So can you guide them towards things that are a little bit more problem-solving based or creative, right? That can be really helpful. Or if you are watching videos, guiding them towards videos that are a little bit more active, right? Physically, but also kind of cognitively. And then the last piece is like, can we take what's on the screen and kind of bring it to our real lives? So can we watch a tutorial and then do whatever that was in the tutorial, right? Like watch a cooking video and then make whatever they made, or play with Legos after you played Minecraft, or my daughter loves like some of these matching games like Gardenscapes. So, okay, fine, you like matching, let's play Chinese checkers or let's play dominoes. It's not the same, I know that, and she's not silly enough to think that it is, but it's scratching similar itches, is what I would say. The last one that I want to touch on is kind of, again, another idea around balance, which is kind of making sure there's some learning and play. And the way we talk about this in my house is we call it dinner before dessert. So you got to eat your vegetables before you have your cake. So before you watch that video, you have to read a book. Or before you play Minecraft, you need to do your reading app that I like you to do. Does she love it? Not always. Will she do it? Most of the time. I think it's really helpful because, again, it gets that balance and it brings up the intention too. So you kind of have to earn it, right? The other thing we've started doing too now is more like a dessert before dinner situation where I say, watch the video, but then write a sentence for me afterwards about it. She loves that one too. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was just around sort of selecting good content. There's lots and lots of different ways of finding good apps, for example, and finding good videos. The dark blue on the right side is kind of the features that you might look for in a good quality video. And the other three are ways that we might think about finding good quality apps. So again, I'm not going to share with you like the whole host of apps because there's so many and they change all the time. But what I will say is I always look for first the reviews. So look for how other people have reviewed and rated it. And also I look for things that have limited or no ads or purchases. I cannot stress enough how awful all those pop-up ads are, and it just leads to lots of frustration. And so I try to stick to things that don't have that, which sometimes means that you're paying for things. So again, I always try to read reviews to make sure if I am going to pay for something that it's really good. But again, I also really stress looking for things that are a little bit more active and a little bit more engaging. So I look for that in reviews so that I know that that piece is included. I will say too, for slightly older children, the apps that I just showed, these are obviously more intended for children on the younger end. For older children, I suggest things like Apple Arcade and Google Play Pass. These are places where there's often really, good high quality games that are often ad-free. So it's a helpful place. Common Sense Media is a website. They report on just about everything, but apps, I always look there too for if I'm thinking about downloading an app, is it good? Do they rate it? They'll tell you straight up if they like it or not. And general tips, again, is looking for a purpose and not just looking for a purpose. Like all apps and games probably have a purpose, but does that purpose align with what you want your child to do? So personally, like I don't want my child to play like a really violent game, for example. It has a purpose. That doesn't align with what I want. So I might kind of guide her to a different type of game. Also look for action in the game. So not necessarily physical activity, though that can be helpful, but more like that you're doing something specific, right? That there's some kind of action or interaction that's happening. And opportunities for the user to generate and create are really helpful. And last thing is about videos. So again, videos are changing all the time. They're getting added all the time. There's so many new things. I try to intersperse, again, that kind of dessert before dinner approach, intersperse these types of videos where it's a little more active. So like, videos where you actually have to get up and do something, move your body, or even things like drawing tutorials, right? Where you're kind of engaging your fine motor skills, as well as kind of read aloud books. Great way to engage with books, but just online. Intersperse those with the videos that she wants to watch. And it sort of, I think, helps to, again, like bring a little bit of intention, and it keeps me engaged in what she's doing. So, in summary, I think there's lots of affordances for screens, increased engagement, interest, things like that. There are challenges, but those can be mitigated. And we should, when we're looking for apps, try to find apps that are interactive, have a purpose that we can agree with, and opportunities to create as much as possible. When looking for videos, try to increase those videos that might be active or interactive, specifically made for children, high quality, as much as possible. There's my email. If you ever want to get in touch, please do. And thank you for your time. Great talking to you.
And we will do a question and answer session at the end. So if you have burning questions, save them. And both Tyler and Margaret will be available to answer them. So our next speaker is Dr. Tyler, let me make sure I say it right, Prochnow. Did I get it?
Yes. You got it.
Okay. He is assistant professor of health behavior in the School of Public Health at Texas A&M. His research primarily focuses on the impacts of social connectedness on health and wellness. He has expertise in physical activity, mental health, and adolescent health, working with community partners like Boys and Girls Club, as well as local health districts. So, welcome, Dr. Tyler Prochnow. Yeah.
And I apologize. I do move while I talk, so just heads up. I'm a physical activity person, so get out and about. So my talk is going to be a little bit more older focused, so this would be teenagers, and just like Krista said, my research is focused on social connectedness. So I will spend most of my time talking about social connectedness, mental health, and specifically how we are going to foster good online connections and online social connectedness. Okay. Is it going to reach? Perfect. Awesome. So today's discussion, I'm going to base this on why social connections matter. So we're going to take a little bit about mental health and in real life connections, as well as online connections. We're going to understand a little bit more about online social connectedness, how adolescents feel that, what are the impacts of that. We're also going to talk a little bit about the risks, obviously, of digital interactions and social interactions online. And then I've got a few practical strategies at the end, as well as a little take-home sheet, because obviously this is just the start of the conversation. There's going to be way more that you can search online. I've curated a little bit of a list of places that I would go if I'm looking for that kind of information. All right, so today's digital reality, obviously, online sources of connection are everywhere. We're not going to run away from them. Adolescents are going to feel connection and going to go to digital sources for social media, news, games, everything. They are going to be on there. We are seeing that 81% of teens report social media helps them feel connected to those around them. We often see the negatives, and I'm not going to say that those negatives aren't existing, because I do have slides for that, don't worry. We also saw, Margaret could not have done a greater job of setting me up for that, because all of that screen time and all of those negative things are still impacting past early childhood, right? That still goes on into adolescence, but social media is now being viewed as a fundamental context for social development. And the more that we can engage with our teens about that context, the better those conversations are going to get. So why do social connections matter? Social connectedness is essential for us as humans. Not just online connectedness, not just adolescents, you all here in person, all of those things. We are wired for connection, physically, mentally, emotionally, all of those things. If we do not have social connectedness, if we don't have the right kinds of social connectedness, it takes years off of our lives. It makes those years less enjoyable. We need that connectedness. Now, you might be sitting there and say, I'm an introvert. I don't need that much social connectedness, Tyler. Yes, you might have a point there, but you still have some type of connectedness that you feel. It might be a very strong friend, it may be a spouse, it may be a partner, it may be family. You do need some kind of connectedness, right? And we see through social connectedness, it improves mental health outcomes, physical health outcomes, and it often helps us to protect against maladaptive or negative coping strategies. If we turn to close friends, family that are supportive of ourselves. And building in that adolescent mental health concerns, we see that about 34% of adolescents between the ages of 12 and 17 are reporting some kind of depressive symptoms. And we see that number is rising year over year. We also see that social connectedness has a buffering effect, meaning that social connectedness can protect adolescents against depressive symptoms. Both protect them against actually having depressive symptoms and also making those depressive symptoms a little bit more that they can actually work through those depressive symptoms on their own and through their social connectedness. And I'm going to hit this point more often than I probably should, but quality, just like Margaret was saying, quality connections are going to matter more than the quantity and also the context. So quality, quality, quality. So understanding connections. The U.S. Surgeon General's advisory has looked at these 3 specific types or aspects of connections. So when I'm reading off these things, I'd like you to kind of put yourself into these shoes. So think of the people that you feel closest to right now. I don't mean physically, don't reach out and touch someone. I mean emotionally, right? I know I saw someone, I was like, no, don't do that. Emotionally close. Think of the people that you are emotionally close to. Now, the Surgeon General tells us that the number or variety of connections, and I'm speaking online here, but also I want you to put yourself in your own shoes. In-person connections, the amount of variety matters. The quality, the nature, or perceived positivity of these interactions are also very beneficial and something that we need to understand. And then the functions, and I'm again placing this in our teen situation, but how teens or how you rely on those connections, or what you rely on them for. All of those things matter when we talk about social connectedness. And I've phrased these in terms of online connectedness. I've told you to think about them as in-person connectedness. Teens often think of them as one. Right? There's no division sometimes. When you are thinking about those people that you are closest to, there might be people that you feel so close to and you talked to today, but you didn't see them. Right? You might have messaged them on Facebook, you might have texted them, you might have done Snapchat, you might have, I'm sorry, maybe not Snapchat, but you might have FaceTimed them, all of those things. Those are avenues for people to use digital ways to connect with others. Right? So types of online engagement, and I'm just going to go right off of Margaret's book on the active and passive use, and specifically when we are talking about online engagement through social media. Right? So what we are seeing in the literature is that active use, so using social media for a specific purpose, posting, commenting, sharing posts, doing something that connects you with someone else, is beneficial for your feelings of social connectedness. If you are going to that specific site for a purpose and fulfilling that purpose, that is more beneficial. If we are sitting on social media or using social sources or online sources in a passive way, so this is scrolling, browsing, things that you are not actively engaging with the content, just like Margaret was saying, actively engaging with that, those are oftentimes more linked to poor mental health. So things like the doom scroll, or when you are watching something, or you are going through TikTok or Instagram, and you are just sitting there and scrolling, and before you know it, it's been 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, and you can't even remember what you watched in the last 15 seconds. So that numbing kind of approach has been linked to those negative health outcomes. So some benefits of social connectedness online. So reduced feelings of isolation or loneliness. Again, active use linked to these reduced feelings of loneliness. Passive use was linked to greater feelings of loneliness. So also can serve as protective factors against suicidal ideation. This was seen in some studies specifically about adolescents that were seeking help, seeking mental health help, and seeking advice through online means. So if they sought that help and found that help, actually received that help through these online means, actively seeking, actively receiving, that was a protective factor. Now if they did not find that, there was negative impacts as well. Online friendships can buffer against effects of stress and depression, kind of already hit that. Provide social support during challenging times, and specifically when we talk about finding resources that might not be right in their wheelhouse, right? Not right in their social circle that is closest to them. If they can, maybe they have a friend that is not in the neighborhood. Maybe there's a friend that is in a different school district, in a different city. If they are using this to activate those social support ties when they are not able to get that in real life or go to their house or whatever it might be, these are ways that we can use social media and online connectedness for their benefit. And again, risks. I'm only going to list a few of them. We've heard them probably more than we've heard about our benefits, so I didn't want to spend too much time on that. But social comparison is one that we're seeing in the literature. So if they are on social media and comparing themselves, not connecting to them, but comparing themselves to that, that is linked to negative outcomes. Cyber victimization or cyberbullying, big problem. That can actually, I don't want to put words in your mouth, that could probably be its own conversation, right? When we're talking about this, again, it's one of those usage that we can't really prevent against unless we have some of these conversations with our adolescents, right? And our teens. Depression may lead to smaller networks, leaving less connected networks. So it works the same way as in person. So if you are feeling depressed and a little bit down, sometimes you naturally turn within. That also happens in online social connectedness networks. So I think I have this in a further slide, but monitoring and having conversations with your teens about who they are talking to or who they are online with. If you see a dramatic decline or a cutoff of a certain network, that may be a red flag for us. So I kind of put these side by side, online connections versus in-person connectedness. So significantly more positive emotional experiences with in-person connectedness, right? So we're still seeing in-person connectedness being far more beneficial than online connectedness. So I'm not going to make the point that we should all move digitally and all virtual. That's not the point of this talk. But online connectedness can give us greater accessibility, just like I was saying in the last slide, greater accessibility if that physical distance is there, if we are using it to connect with others that are not close to us. It also gives some teens some safe space for disclosure, and specifically those that may exhibit social anxiety in in-person social experiences. Online connections are also great for identity exploration. So for those that are connecting with facts or connecting with concepts that are not in their present network, we call that kind of a bridging social capital. We are looking for some new information that we are bringing into our own social networks. The continuous availability can be a positive and a negative. Just like how Margaret was saying, is the time spent on there, you might have some self-regulation issues that we might need to talk about, but the constant availability of the support structure being there or being able to reach out to that support structure. And it can be a protection against loneliness when face-to-face interactions are not possible. I think we all saw that during the COVID pandemic. Using some of these means, again, in an active way, that quality connection using active means to connect with others. And again, these benefits over here, so often preferred in help-seeking situations, greater depth of emotional intimacy, greater interaction, both you can see nonverbal information and things like that. So I'm not going to make the case that online is the only way. Again, we are going to supplement in-person connectedness with online means. So again, just like Margaret said, it's like we looked at each other's slides before making them, but finding that balance is what we really need to do. So both connections and types of connections contribute to well-being and contribute to feelings of social connectedness and feelings of well-being. So quality matters over the medium and over the size of the network or the amount of connections. And really the most resilient teens and the teens that are the most well-adapted have vibrant lives in both online means and in-person means. Digital connections work best when they are complementing, not replacing online connections. So I have a few strategies, and I will preface this with, I do not have a child. I have 2 fur babies at home. So these are what I am seeing in the literature and best practices. I do not try them out on my doggo. So encourage quality connections. I've hit that point a few times, but promote those active uses versus passive uses. Help distinguish between connection versus comparison. So when you are having some of these conversations, just like Margaret was saying, is asking questions about their connectedness or their usage of online and fostering those starting points. And if the conversation is, well, I don't know what I did for the last hour on social media or Instagram or whatever it might be, that might be an avenue to say, okay, well, why are we on there? You know, why did you decide to be there in the first place? Well, let's align those goals. In that same kind of conversation, I think I hit this in the next slide too, but just like you are having conversations with in real life friends, same thing with online friends. So those same conversations about who's good, who's bad, how are you interacting with those individuals, those are conversations that we can start and discuss what makes that connection, what makes that friendship, what makes that website meaningful for those teens. And again, quality over quantity. Monitor changes. I brought this up just a little bit, but changes in online behavior may indicate some change in their well-being. So whether that be a dramatic increase or dramatic decrease, and those can be starts of conversations right there. The depression, like I said, alters friendship patterns, both online and in person. Withdrawal from previously enjoyed platforms may be an indication for us to dig a little deeper there. Foster that open dialogue, so both positive and negative interactions online, discussing some of those interactions and how they make those teens feel, both with people that you do know and people that maybe you're not as well familiar with. And also a big point here is creating that judgment-free zone. If your start of that conversation is, well, in my day we didn't connect like that, that's going to shut that down really quick, right? Or, well, you know, that's just someone you talk to online, like that's not really important. Well, that's a very viable interaction for those teens. Devaluing that really stops that conversation right away, and you're not going to be able to dig a little bit deeper there. So encouraging that balance with online and offline friendships. Margaret did a good job of talking about balance and creating space for outdoor play, indoor play, things like that. Same thing. So encourage both online and in person, or connecting with in-person friends through online means as well. Recognizing, so those online friendships, like I just said, are real, and validating their ways of connection. Just like how we're talking about different apps or different ways that we found knowledge and having to go to the library, same thing. These are valid ways that people are connecting now, and making sure that we validate those feelings in our teens. So kind of conclusion, so I tried to hit on a few main points throughout, but online connectedness can benefit teens when used actively and mindfully. Understanding the complex relationship between online engagement and well-being is important for us to continue to dig into. And just like Margaret said, if I give you those apps, it's going to change. So just like this research, it's going to continually change as we go forward, and we're still learning about that complex relationship. The goal for this is not to eliminate online connectedness or not to eliminate teens connecting through that way, but understanding and validating that approach and learning more about those online relationships. And then consider quality and mindful guidance over judgment and elimination. Again, we are not trying to just take a whole context away. We are just trying to learn more about that. So this is some resources. If you scan this code, it'll take you to a Canva page that has them all, and all of them are hyperlinked. So if you want to take that, download it, and then save it, all of those links will lead you to these pages. I know it was extremely small. If I printed it out, you might have it for a little bit, but does it work?
Yeah.
Perfect. Then you can have it and you can take it with you. I can't promise that I will keep them up to date, but they are up to date as of this morning. I'll keep that up there for a little bit. always bring that back up if we need it again. So I've also delineated official organizations. I believe Common Sense Media, Margaret mentioned that, so that is in here as well. Research organizations, books, support groups, and then mental health specific resources, since I touched on that a little bit today. Otherwise I can come back to it too. A selfish plug, I do have a study going on this summer about the built environment, so the structures around, so the physical environment for adolescents and their social environment. It's a week-long study. They get to earn almost $100 over the summer for that week-long study. So if you have someone that is going into grades 7, 8, and 9, go ahead and take a flyer in the back. If you do not have someone in 6, 7, or 8, or sorry, 7, 8, and 9 right now, this is a 3-year study, so hang on to it. And that is all I have, and yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, we're gonna move into just our question and answer. If you have burning questions you would like to ask either Dr. Quinn or Dr. Prochnow, I'll kind of open up the floor. If not, I have a few that were emailed to me, but if y'all have any burning ones.
Hi. I originally came here because I own a marketing agency, and so I was interested to see what the city and university was saying about just social media and intaking everything, frankly. So I was just trying to come from that perspective, but now I'm sitting here and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have a 15-year-old sister, and I'm like trying to be a great big sister if I can be, and so I'm sitting here, and my question is, how can I, as someone who's not the parent, be a great resource, besides being open and having, a dialogue with her about best practices, but like what are things that I could do to encourage her to be a little bit more decisive, I guess? I mean, I don't know, my question's maybe not direct, but I think this would be directed maybe to you, Dr. Tyler, but is there anything in particular, me not having direct control over her, as a sister, is there something that you've come across that would help?
So, I mean, that's a real complex, because for one, my question would be, how comfortable are you with self-disclosure about some of these things to her?
Yeah.
And start that conversation about, here are some things that I've done, here are how, even if it's starting a conversation like, oh gosh, I just got off of Instagram and I don't know what just happened. Like I just doom scrolled for. You ever have that happen to you? And kind of just sit there and say, okay, well, what kind of social media do you use? Or like, if you want to phrase it as what do the youngins do these days? Like that's what but starting, like I said, starting that conversation, and you might be in a different perspective on that than maybe your parents do, so you might get some different answers from her. And I think it just starts there, and kind of understanding the use of that, and we use the term like cognitive dissonance, creating that cognitive dissonance between what they think they're going to that social media for or using screens for versus what they are actually getting out of it. And I think Margaret did a good job of bringing that up in a more early career or learning situation, but it works the same way with teens and online connectedness now.
Oh, thank you.
Does that kind of
yeah,
start?
It's awesome.
Yeah, y'all did an awesome job. Thank y'all so much. So this one's probably directed to you for more of the littles. If you, you mentioned using screen time like, or, thinking about it like dinner before dessert. Have y'all seen anything where where it changes kind of their brain when you use screens as a reward? Like, does it,
Yeah, that's a great question. It's mixed. So again, it really depends contextually on how it's used and for whom it's used. So for neuroatypical, that reward process works really differently than for typically developing kiddos. But it is very mixed. And again, I think it's sort of how you frame it, like as a reward versus, I call it an approach. So I'm literally, these are things I'm telling you that I did like last night. Like these are things that are happening in my house all the time. We have like an agreement about how screen time works. And so it's like one of 3 approaches. You can either like do this thing that I want you to do, right? Like this thing that we've agreed upon that is productive and intentional. That's one option. She doesn't often choose that one. The second option is that we can alternate. So like I'll choose something, you choose something, right? So I'm not trying to set it up as a reward, but setting it up rather as like, this is just something that we do. This is how we do it. And so again, like I think you're right that there is that research that maybe if you position it as a like, do this first, then you get this, but these are just how we engage with screens in our family. And again, like even actually what you were talking about, I will talk to my daughter about like, sometimes when I use my screen, like I can use it for too long and do things that are not productive. Like we have these conversations because I think it's important to model that kind of good use. Mm-hmm. That's a great question.
Yeah, for sure. So would you, like in the literature, do you see anything about not using it as a reward? Like, hey, you did a great job today at school, you get 5 minutes extra screen time this weekend.
I haven't seen that specifically. Okay. Like there is not anything clear cut that says doing that is bad or doing that is good, right? Okay. But I think guidelines are a little mixed on that still. I think that clear cut of a like, you did X, so you get Y, if they aren't matched to each other, like they're not aligned. Do you know what I mean? Like you did this good thing over here and now you get this unrelated good thing, right? It doesn't conceptually make sense. Mm-hmm. It's the same way as like if you did a bad thing, right? Like let's say you broke something and you lied to me about it. And I say, okay, well, no ice cream for a week. Those don't really have anything to do with each other. And so conceptually for a young child, it's hard to understand like why did that happen. And the same is true for when it's positive, right? Whereas if you made good choices while using your screen, yeah, great, you get extra time, right? Like so the rewards can be set up in a way that I think conceptually makes sense rather than sort of like, oh, you know, you did this good thing, you did your chores, now you get 15 extra minutes. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, that's great.
I also, just to add to that point, some of the reason why, like, I know I did a lot of like hedging, like it's not definite causal reactions, just like a lot of what we're seeing is the literature and the science is adapting, and what we've had so far is screen minutes or time, and it was not a great indication of what was on that screen, and science is catching up to that, but just like we both kind of, I think the hallmarks of both of our is it matters more what's on the screen and how you interact with it than actually just being on a screen. But the literature is catching up to that point of now we are better understanding that. But so much of what is actually out there and what is being broadcast is just time. And
again, they're not all created equal, right? Like
yeah, and I think we both agree that that's not necessarily a great indication right now.
Yeah.
But that's where the literature is.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you guys.
Thanks.
In the same way that you would say all screen time is not created equal in passive versus active, would you say that screen time is not always created equal in regards to TV versus iPad versus cell phone?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, they're not all created equal, right? Because they're doing different things. So when you are engaged with the TV, for example, that's going to be 100% passive, right? Whereas iPad phone is going to be a mix, probably. And so, yeah, the research suggests, again, it's catching up. So they haven't done as much exploration on that fine-grained of a level of like iPad versus.
I know someone that is
doing that.
One of my friends is on the front end of it, and I was talking to him the amount of hoops that they have to go through to put a tracking app on every screen in a household and sync those. But yes, people are doing it.
Yeah.
We won't know about it.
Right,
we won't know about it for a little bit.
years.
The other thing that I'll say about that too is when you are watching it, say on a TV screen, and I kind of take this back years, as a family, if you are watching something and interacting with that content together and having a conversation about it, or you are all being impacted by the same show, the same movie, whatever it is, that is a sense of togetherness, and you can have conversations. And you know, one of my favorite things is watching Ted Lasso with my parents, like being able to foster some of those connectedness and those conversations that something like that, a unified activity, would give you. That it's still passive, but that is very different than watching different TV shows or different Instagram reels on your phones all at the same time.
Anything about like Flash and the addicted nature of Flash, like the flash of a TV is going to be very different than the flash of an iPad. And
well, yeah, and the
brightness
pace is
and the
very
pace.
different. As
And
as I think you're
anything about like
saying.
the development of small children.
Certainly for young children,
brains.
yes, they've started to look at that, for sure, for very young children especially, because that's why we have much clearer recommendations for screen time for kids up to 5. Once they get to 5, they say, well, just make it high quality. But like no real indication of what high quality is, whereas under 5, they're very clear about how much time, and a lot of that has to do with some of the concerns you're talking about flash and pace and all of those things, because they do have effect on cognitive aspects especially.
I will add just a little bit. It's not necessarily your flash, but it is closer to pace.
Yeah.
As far as, and again, literature is still being developed. I don't have any hard and fast, but they are looking at the scroll rate, and specifically things like TikTok or Instagram, where the average engagement with a single event is so small. So is it narrowing attention spans to the seconds that, yes.
Yeah, yes.
So there's some research that is starting to happen on that, but again, the difficulty that we're seeing is once you set up a study, by the time you set up a study, that medium is now progressed and it's changed, and now we are attacking it from a different angle, and oh, now it's over here. So they are looking at that, and
But the pace of things happening, it just happens so quickly that then, oh, nobody uses that app anymore, right? Like that one's not cool. So, you know, it all changes so fast, which I think it's a great question.
It's great.
Hello for everyone. I'm Dr. Elmlat, Earth Science in the Universe, but I'm a parent here. And I work also for Facebook. I would like to share my expertise that will add to your presentation. First and foremost, I really admire your presentation, and I like the fact that you're both chronologically complete. She covered like Dr. Margaret, the little
She's
kids.
Yeah.
And you guys like with the teens and young. So my adds on to your presentation is going to be more for youth people, because as a person who worked for Facebook for 2 years and I was head of training department, what I've been seeing, I was lucky that I've seen what I've seen, but in the same time I feel like sorry for the next generation because there is a lot of things going on the Facebook, so it's going to be used as a very, very, very powerful tool to help some people, but in the same time it should be very regularized by people that they are very vulnerable, because cyberbullying is going to be very dramatic. And so overall, what I want to add specifically, if I want to be surgical to your presentation, only online connectedness, it's important if it is very regularized by educator and parent and people. I can give a very specific example of 2 cases that resonated with me when I was working for Facebook. It's one case that a lady, her name is Amanda, she was 16, that she was committed suicide live. Why? Because she was cyberbullying by her teens, and not only because the family they weren't controlling the whole scene, but because it's been for years she wasn't closely loved by her family, but she get that love from the online media. That's technically in her mind, it's her family. So at a certain level, she get disconnected from the real world, which is her family, and she connected to the virtual world, which is Facebook. So it ended up sadly, but what I learned, it should be regularized, because the flip side, there is another case that the lady Facebook saved her life because she had a friend's family that they respond to her call emotionally. So online, we're grateful to the media, we're grateful to technology, but it should be used very carefully. So I'm very mindful. Personally, I have 2 boys. They don't have access to media if I'm not there. So they have all the parental control. And my husband, he's an artificial intelligence doctor, so they have all the bugs. No, we cannot get there. Which I really love because we invest a lot in our kids and we want them to be successful. We don't want that social media take them away from us at social level. So online connectedness, yes, but regularized. That's all.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Yeah.
Great perspective.
That's kind of my question. When you talk about the bridging, I see the value of getting an outsider that's outside of our sphere of knowledge that could potentially be a connection for a kid. But without that parental side of saying like, hey, what did you talk with that person? And that check-in, that checkpoint, it seems very scary to say, hey, my kid has this desire to know about something I don't know about, go find a thing online. That doesn't seem, but without that check-in, so I think that they complement each other as well.
No, I think that's a great point. You know, if we take this and make it in real life connection and say the same thing of, you know, my teen is now connecting with and talking to someone across town that I have no idea about, you're going to ask about that and you're going to want to know a little bit more information about what's going on, who's that person and things like that. And I think we are not as well equipped, and we are, like, all we're saying is like it happened so fast and we're trying to get our arms around it. But those same conversations that you would have with an in-person connection, we need to be having those with the online connection. So they can be beneficial, but they can also be
Powerful.
Yes.
I was going to say, we're going to take one more question.
Can I ask, so I'm on the school board for CSISD, so kind of having a perspective about things that have come to kind of our level regarding screens and technology, and I can think of kind of 2 questions and I'd be interested in hearing your expertise on. One side is, well, we have it in our strategic plan, right? How do we integrate technology in an educational way in classrooms, you know, all the way from K through 12 and do that, you know, the right way. So that's kind of one question. The other question we get is just, you know, kids having their personal screens and phones in the classroom. You know, we had a parent give us all the Anxious Generation book to read, right, and all that information, and parents asking, so kind of your expertise on that, like, what do you think your recommendations would be on kids having screens in classrooms as well?
Sure. I'll take the first one.
Go for it. By all means.
So for the first question about how do we integrate screen, I mean, like, obviously that's a huge question.
Yes.
Because there's so many different approaches that screens can be effectively incorporated into classrooms. The one kind of thing I would highlight, I guess, because again, I could give like an hour-long talk about that, but one thing I would highlight, and this is regardless of level, is that if you're integrating a screen, it's just the same as what you would do with your kiddo at home. There has to be an intentional use for it. So it's not screens for screen's sake. And sometimes, like, I visit a lot of classrooms, and sometimes screen use is good, and sometimes it's just an additional thing that's there that's maybe increasing engagement, but often actually it doesn't even do that. And so I think something I look for is either one, again, intentional use, and then the other thing is, does the tech extend? Like, does it extend what we could do without it, right? Like, it should not just be there for an intentional use, but actually we're going to use this in a really cool way that we couldn't do without it. That then increases the meaningfulness of that integration. But again, I could say lots of things, but
I mean, I remember going to the back of the room and doing word muncher on the.
yeah.
that might be dating me as well.
Keep you out of trouble.
Yeah, I know, right? So the personal screen situation, I'm going to be transparent. That is not my own research, so I'm not speaking from my body of literature there. Just what I've read is it's in its infancy of actually understanding the efficacy and how those, those programs of removing screens, the pouches and all the whole thing, if that actually matters, theoretically and conceptually and everything that has been written that I've read, it does work. But the studies that are actually like going into schools and measuring those things, those are still being done. Those studies are being done. Now, what I've done and what I have seen, they would be beneficial. The removal of in-person,
And what ages, by the way? Do you have all ages?
All ages.
Do you let your students use tech in
Oh
class?
shoot, I don't even think.
Gotcha.
So like phones in my graduate or my undergraduate classes, I don't directly remove them, but that's also I think more of the policy is not there. If I'm the only professor that is doing that, that's. But if it is a policy-wide, school-wide situation, that might be a different situation.
When, just to answer your question, when I was a trainer for Facebook, we removed all the cell phones, put them in locker. And the baskets, everybody teaching there. I think it's policy because they're not allowed to take picture of the content of Facebook. But in the same time, they are not allowed to take their cell phone to be very engaged with my training. Yeah, because they are going to be doing the handling the report and things like that. It's a high priority. So they are all have their cell phones outside of the room before they get into the room. So, and we would adult, like 21 years above, they are not allowed to have their cell phones.
Can work.
Well, that's it. If y'all have more questions for them, I know they'll be here for a few more minutes. So feel free to come up, introduce yourself if you have any other questions. So other than that, thank y'all so much for joining us for this.